Welcome back to the Defiant Spirit and Wealth 360, my joint venture with my good friend and financial expert, Michael Mick Feiner. What's happening, Michael?
Not too much. Welcome back from Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Yeah, we headed down to Arizona, beautiful Arizona. It's a destination for a lot of Coloradoans this time of year, and went down there with the family. What'd you do? You were in Florida? No, you were at home.
I actually was in Florida, but then I came back and just kind of spent Thanksgiving at home. Kids came in from Washington and New York, and my mother came up and a few other things. So kind of quiet, which
Yeah, I
was
thought
nice.
I remembered seeing pictures of your beloved partner Apollo in the water somewhere doing
Yeah,
something.
Apollo loves water, mud, anything wet. He wouldn't come in last night in a rainstorm, so it was pleasant.
I can't wait till we do the podcast on Apollo Enneagram 7, the enthusiast, not the enthusiast, the enthusiast.
Yeah,
So, but not today. That's not
not,
our talk.
not today. We have almost the opposite of Apollo today, right?
Almost the opposite of Apollo. Anybody joining us? We are marching through week by week the Enneagram from number 1 all the way around the Enneagram to number 9. And we started, well, 4 weeks ago because now we're on Enneagram 4. And Enneagram 4 is called many things in different systems. I'm pulling it up for anybody watching on YouTube, but you don't have to certainly be looking. You can also just be listening, and we'll describe to you the individualist, sometimes called the romantic, maybe the creative. And you can learn more about that on this week's podcast in general, because every week I'm doing the Enneagram type in general. And then Michael and I are jumping on our podcast to talk about it through the lens of money, wealth, and investing. And in this case, it's the alternative investor. So, probably not the most likely investor, probably not the most interested in money, but certainly many Enneagram 4s have left their mark on society in a big way, not the least of which is financially. So, maybe we'll talk through some of the basics of Enneagram for the alternative investor. So, who comes to mind when we talk about Enneagram 4, Michael?
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, are we talking about investors? But I guess the most interesting one of late, or two most interesting, are King Charles and Kanye West, right?
Ah,
Who, for different reasons, um, are sort of for investors.
so both of them, I still think of obviously Prince Charles, but now you're right. It's King Charles. It
You
says
know,
right there, King Charles. Um, yes, they are. They are one of a kinds, especially Kanye, or now known as Ye.
is it yay or ye or?
I just assuming it was Ye because it's Kanye, but maybe it's Ye. I
Okay,
don't
you're
know.
right. I can't. I'll
But
go with
that's
your.
it's kind of the point because fours are. Listen to my previous podcast on fours in general, but fours are the originals, right? And there's just this originality to them, and you can just see it in Kanye West. And now even Kanye is not an original enough name. Now it's just Ye, and they're the most enigmatic of all Enneagram types, and I think that's probably true as well as it translates to investing.
I think it's very true. I do remember when King Charles was Prince Charles,
Like 2 weeks
probably
ago, yeah.
not 2 weeks ago, but probably about 30 years ago. It could be longer, and I'm dating myself, I know, but he was into organic farming really early on some of his estates, and people used to criticize him as a ridiculous venture, that he was way out there. This was stupid. Who was going to eat organic food? And 30 years later, I remember listening to him saying that his actual most profitable venture right now are his farms or his land that's producing organic crops. But he was so far ahead of himself. I mean, 30 years ago, you really weren't thinking organic, and he was way ahead of that in a sense. So in a way, I like to, and I don't know if I'm right about this, and I'll use you, but they are trendsetters in a way, or they're ahead of the times in so many ways.
So yeah, fours are just so hard to pin down. Let's come back to that. Let's jump over to this slide here. We have a whole program for anybody interested. It's not quite ready for publication, but certainly making its way there as we kind of evolve it. And if you're looking, you'll see for yourself. If not, I'll read it to you. We've kind of come up with three tiers of investors. Sort of a tier one, we're calling them, at least for now, energized investors, the most motivated investors. Tier two, average, can take it or leave it. Tier three are passive investors. And so fours fall into this latter tier. They're not that motivated by money. They're not that motivated by finance. However, they're motivated by creativity and originality, and that's what you're talking about, Michael. Is that creativity, that originality, sometimes makes them into natural entrepreneurs, right? Because they're looking for that what's different.
I think that's, yeah, they are. I think of them as differentiators. They're looking at a way to either improve things or to make things different, or they're looking at it at a different angle.
Yeah, they are originals, and so they tend towards an originality. Now, see, I put down here in these kind of fun little ribbons that each type is getting. I'll just read through them. The lowest earner. Now, is that true? It depends on the four. It depends on their, how healthy they are. It depends on their profession. But by and large, I think it is true just because they're the least motivated by money. But when they hit it big, look at this far right one over here. I'll read it for you. It says the most likely to be a millionaire from selling their art, because
Right.
they can be a starving artist on one hand, or they can be a multi-mega billionaire like Michael Jackson before he died, because of their artwork. So it's just really hard to pin them down. But it is true, they're not motivated by money, even if they do make money. They don't gravitate towards professions typically that are high money, that we associate with high earning. They don't really strive towards being, in a corporate setting, which you'll find higher earners. And I put down here for, all your fours listening, you'll resonate. My wife's a four, most in need of a financial advisor. She'd be the first to tell you that's probably true.
I think they probably most. I suspect it is a tier three. They're the most hands off, like you said, passive investors, and that's why they. You know, it's helpful to have a financial advisor for someone who's a little more hands off.
Yeah, we ranked them in our system number 9 out of 9. It doesn't, again, mean that they don't make money or can't invest money. It just factors in a lot of different things, not the least of which is that motivation. When I think of fours, Enneagram 4, the alternative investor, I think of people who are much more interested in meaning than money. And yet, money makes the world go round, right? So you need money in some ways to pursue your meaning. And I think that that's what can bring them to the financial table, is how money becomes a means to living a life of meaning. And so they go hand in glove. It's just that that's the order it comes in: meaning and then money.
Well, I think you also hit on a really good point uh, when you created this. Is that from the budgeting and savings perspective, they're probably the most unlikely to use budgets and to maybe keep to a budget in a system financially. And that's important to understand.
Yeah, I'm gonna zoom out so people can see us. Yeah, let's talk about why that might be. Being married to a four, I can tell you they don't like budgets. And it's not that they can't budget. It's not that, fours may be as intellectual as anybody, but that originality piece drives so much of what a four is about. And budgets are ordinary. They're mundane. They're by definition the most ordinary thing you can think of.
I feel so ordinary now as a CPA. That was a compliment, wasn't it? How ordinary, in a great way. No, I understand, but it
I
is
don't want my
mundane.
I don't want my CPA or my financial planner to be an eccentric,
Yeah,
right? I want them
mundane.
to be kind of within the straight and narrow. I don't want too much creativity when it comes
Yeah,
to my money.
yeah. I won't be painting any portrait. I won't be painting after this or playing a piano, you know, concerto.
So there's something about that though, because look, first of all fours are not artists, but many, if not most artists are fours. And
Okay.
every four I meet, whether or not they're an artist, has this artistic spirit. Even if I say artistic spirit, the fours who are listening right now probably perked up because all their hands go up and say, ooh, I want an artistic spirit. And threes, like maybe, maybe not. But fours, unequivocally, even though they're both next door neighbors on the Enneagram, I can't think of two almost more diametrically opposed types than three and four.
I think that the interesting thing about, yeah, 3 and 4, or just four, is that you know a four when you see one, too. Unlike some of the other Enneagram types, which are really hard to discern, I seem to understand fours better, or can at least identify maybe what a four is better than I can other things. I don't know if there's a reason for that. B.
Well, let's come back to our slide here. I mean, when you look at some of the famous fours, individualists, alternative investors, you have people like Lady Gaga, right? Like she's like an unmistakable personality. Every time you see her, there's flair. I mean, it was, did you see that movie she was in? Just blanked on the name of it. She was a singer. Great movie.
Yeah, you mean with Bradley Cooper?
Yeah, yeah. It came out like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's like the fourth. Of course, we can't name it. It's the
it's
Barbara Streisand and Christopher.
Yeah, it's the remake of that, and people are gonna
I
chime
know.
in here.
You wonder why I'm not a four. I can't remember, but
But
great movie.
it was
Great
shocking to
movie.
see her without costume, without makeup, without flair. And there was like this ordinariness to her that almost it was like hard to register because that's not how we think of Lady Gaga. Johnny Depp. You see him going into the courtroom last year, and there's just flair about even in a courtroom where most people try and get rid of the flair, like wear your nice suit and like look mainstream, and even he couldn't do it if he tried. These people, the George Michael, right, just is known for this kind of
Right.
unmistakability. And so yeah, fours are really unmistakable, even the ones that aren't megastars.
A Star is Born.
Star is born, there you go.
There you go. There you go.
um so there's this creative
Yeah.
spirit that just makes them unmistakable. They also like to dress, sort of in a fourish way where they're unmistakable, they're recognizable. And so, yes, you're right. They're relatively easy to spot, and yet they're very hard to pin down as to what drives them. Or I guess I would turn to you. Tell me, think of maybe a four investor that you have, and maybe describe some of the way they approach their finances and money.
No, I have a few for investors, and like you said, they are not concerned about the financial process. They may have goals within the process to make sure they're secure, or that they have some sort of target that they're looking to meet, or a goal. It could be retirement, it could be make sure there's sufficient funds for living, but the goal certainly isn't wealth accumulation as a primary need. And usually they're doing it almost kind of like a two does for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a client who is an excellent chess player, for example, who I think is probably a four, and he's just concerned about playing chess. That's the reason for his money, right? To to do that, he has a flair to him. He's probably partially a 5 too because of his deep thinking, but I think there's a four in it. But I think you're right. They generally aren't focused on the money. It's a means to an end, not an end in itself.
So if you look at this slide, and get anybody listening, I'll tell you what's going on here. But the four and the five are at the bottom of the Enneagram because it's a complex. The bottom of the Enneagram is a little more complex, a little, darker, more introverted, more, fours go into deep emotion, fives go into deep thinking. And that's really where they hang out. They live. Fours just live in this deep, sophisticated emotional place. And so all the stuff on the surface is necessary. Same with the fives. It's necessary, but for fives, it's a way for them to keep thinking. For fours, it's a way for them to keep feeling. And they'll play the game, they'll do the money, they'll whatever it takes so that they can keep going into their real love, which is the passion of the emotional world for fours. So yeah, you gotta have money, you gotta live. And so but money is a means. Is That's the point. It's not necessarily an end into itself. Unlike threes, unlike eights, much more of an end into itself.
No, it is a big difference. And I've learned that from you and trying to communicate better with my fours, especially that it isn't about the money, it's the uses of the money. So it's such an important distinction.
And for anybody listening, I say this maybe now every podcast, but I think it's important to say every podcast. Why the Enneagram? Myers Briggs is great, and Strength Finders is great, and DISC is great. Those deal, in my experience, with more of the how or what do I do. And the Enneagram is really about why we do what we do. And so once we can know why we do what we do, on the surface, it might look the same. A four investor in some ways may look like a five investor or a one investor, but the why, the motivation is very different. And I think, Michael, I think that's what's so great about what you're using the Enneagram for, is that way you can understand what's motivating the four and speak to that and help them kind of get in touch with it. Because I don't think most fours know what's motivating them.
I, I would suspect that most people don't know what's motivating them when it comes to this. And that's why you've done such a magnificent job with this system, because it helps identify some core beliefs, some core fear, and some core motivation, which does make a difference on how one approaches these topics.
And so if you get into the why, as I always quote Dr. Viktor Frankl at some point in our talk, um, who said those who have a why to live for can bear almost any how. When you know your why, right, then you can deal with the hows. And the hows are the mundane stuff that fours don't really want to deal with. So the why of a four and why they need to look at their finances. Ariella, my wife, and I, the four, have this conversation all the time. She's not interested in the money, but she is interested in having enough money to allow her to pursue her passion, her soul's calling, as she would say it. And so that has shifted her relationship with money, where now she understands it's a means, and a necessary means to the end, which is that meaning for her. And so now when we have our financial talks, we can kind of frame it in a different way than I might if I'm talking to my good buddy, Michael.
Well, you've helped me frame it. Of course, I'm not quite as high level understanding this, except for the analogy that you've taught me about radio frequencies. And to me, the radio frequency is the why in many ways. It's like what you have to be in the same frequency as the other person, or you're not going to probably get it through clearly. As you know, it just takes one little degree on a old school radio channel to be off. You still can hear the message, but it might not be perfectly clear if you're close, but not right. And
Absolutely.
to me, if I know their Enneagram or know their why, it helps me deliver a clear message, or at least a clear signal, versus a lot of static, a lot of things that don't get through or whatnot.
So let's just give our listeners some real examples. When you and I started putting this together, here's a four-ish investment, right? Um, Calling them, ESG investments or impact
Mm.
investing, SRI, but it's taking into consideration something more than just the typical ROI, the return on investment, just the bottom line, the numbers aspect, because that's going to be hard for a four who deals in the currency of emotion, of feeling, of meaning, of depth, to really wrap their head, or I guess, for a four to wrap their heart around if there's no emotional quality to the investment. So we talked about, ESG as maybe a four-ish investment strategy.
No, you're exactly on point. I mean, getting to companies that make a difference. If you're talking to a four, they're certainly willing to invest in companies that make money, but they don't have to maximize profit if there's the additional benefit of the company's doing something good for the world. Let's say an electric vehicle manufacturer. Now, of course, maybe Tesla does make a lot of money, but there are companies that may generate um, clean energy, do ESG investments, farm ecologically and organically, that may not be as high of a profitability investment, but that a 4 loves to own because of the other benefits.
And just knowing that is so helpful. I imagine if I'm a four and I come into you and you speak to me, right, as a four, knowing that that might have some weight versus if I'm a five, the investigator, which really is going to look at that almost as noise. Not that fives don't have feelings, of course they do, and not that they wouldn't want to make an impact, of course they might, but I think they're going to look more at the numbers because it's coming from a more purely rational side.
Of
Fours are
course.
going to want to feel it.
I think you're exactly right, because if I said, let's invest in an organic farm to a 4 and a 5, or let's invest in same farming, but it'll be tobacco to a 4 and a 5. Now, if I bring up tobacco farming to a 4, what radio frequency is that? Probably, I'm just generally probably not, because they may look at that as not a healthy alternative, possibly.
Well,
But if
not
I may
certainly
just look
not
at it, yeah,
certainly not big tobacco, but maybe
no,
it's like an
not the big
African
tobacco. No,
alternative
no. I'm not
organic
talking about
tobacco
like I'm
farming.
talking about big tobacco. I'm talking about cigarettes, not like marijuana or other things that could be healthy or could be
Like
positive.
it
I'm
would
talking about, you know, big pharmaceuticals or big chemicals, or you know, that type of thing, right?
so
They, if I bring that up as the thing, sometimes I'll get looked. I can tell the radio channel isn't
wrong
going.
frequency.
The frequency is in the wrong. I'm on the wrong end of the dial.
You're on AM, it should be on FM.
Yeah, if I said, hey, you get 8% return if you invest in chemicals, that, or things that might have child labor. Not that I want to do that, but just as an extreme example, the 4 is turned off. In fact, they want to turn the frequency off. A 5 will listen to that if it's a high rate of return, just as a difference in communication.
So when I was in the cannabis industry and we were raising money on the first company, I went to a couple fours I knew, and they were very interested because it was circa 19 or 19, it was circa 2015, I think it was. And like in Massachusetts, it was just legalized. So
Hmm.
it was still on the edge. It was outside. You're still an outsider as an investor. And it really was an alternative investment. Now, fast forward 8 years, it's about to probably be federalized, legally federalized, and now it's much more mainstream. It's much more of a commodity. And I just had a conversation with the four about it, and it seemed a little too mainstream for them versus 8 years ago. So the same product, right, depends where we are in the life cycle of that industry.
Uh, you're on point. It's true of solar panels, of electric vehicles, of marijuana, of the next cutting edge. So fours are cutting edge. They're willing to be on point and to try something new. They have much, you know they're very willing to try something untested.
What's really interesting is sometimes people think of fours and sevens as opposites. You have the individualist or the alternative investor, and the enthusiast, the speculative investor, because one is super light, kind of surfacey, and one is more super dark, in extremes and depth, but where they share a similarity. They have no connection. If you see, there's no lines of connection, but what they have is in common is what you just said. They're both creative, right? They're both looking to what's outside the box. And that's where they share this kind of speculative investment quality that I think does bring them into alignment and makes them, I think, look similar. And I think fours are underrated or underappreciated in their vision.
Now, the longer I live, I suppose, the more I appreciate that fours are the most forward thinking, in the sense of willing to test the future products and viewpoints that, like you said, they're almost 20 years, 10 or 20 years ahead of everyone else on trying new
Absolutely.
things.
Yeah. King Charles is an example. And don't think they don't make money. I mean, I went through and I just found some, famous fours that everybody knows, but the net worth, Lady Gaga, $320 million, Leonard Cohen, an undisclosed amount to sell his record portfolio, but it's supposedly the highest in history. Paul Simon, John Lennon, Bob Dylan. You start going through this list. These are, multi millionaires. These are savvy people who've done savvy things in their investments. So just because they're fours doesn't mean they're not interested in money, doesn't mean they don't generate money. It just means that it isn't the primary
Yeah.
driver. What are some other four-ish investments? One of them I came up with talking to Ariella over the years, my wife. She keeps asking us, why aren't we invested in more real estate investments? And I can't think of a less creative, less speculative venture. But I heard what she said in that is, I, Ariella, live in the depth of emotion. My whole world is sophisticated and nuanced and complicated. I can wrap my head around that. That's a simple, solid, touch it, feel it, hold
Hmm.
it investment. That struck me as, like, interestingly almost not four, that it becomes a four-ish investment. How's that sit with you?
That that is really interesting. I almost have to digest that a little bit, but I'm also wondering if it's because it's so solid or earthly that a four likes that. They fours appreciate nature and the earth more than others, I think, and I, you know, appreciate that about them. Right? They appreciate things that come from the earth. I don't know if that has any correlation, but um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I'm not sure if that might be part of it to say, hey, how can the earth produce an investment for me, which is interesting in and of
I,
itself. I love that thinking. I wouldn't have come at it that way for sure, but
yeah.
it is very interesting. Like King Charles, it's like, hey, he's thinking earth, real estate, he's thinking organic farming, right?
Yeah, it's really like, almost sometimes the Enneagram and the energy is, you have to look at the, like on a battery, you have a positive and a negative, and you need to counterbalance those things. And when she said that, I shifted away from like this creative, original thinking to simple. I mean, owning property is just so primal. I don't think we appreciate psychologically the value of owning a home, of owning real estate. It's this primal human need for thousands of years.
You've actually just brought up the best point ever in many ways from a financial planning perspective, and that is there's always the question in financial planning, should I pay the mortgage off of my house? Should I buy a house? What should I do? And versus should I invest the money and all the different alternatives? And you know, one could argue that it's better not to own a home, maybe to invest the money. You might make more money from that and arbitrage and so forth. But to your point of feeling of earth, security, other things, for many people, I'll always advocate buy a piece of property, own your home, pay off the mortgage, do certain things so you can just feel that security. It may not be the best rate of return, which speaks to the four, but it gives you the feeling of peace, serenity, security, strength that you need. But it may not be the best financial decision in the sense of pure math. But for certain people, it's the best life decision. And I think that's the thing that I've become to appreciate with this Enneagram. I can't look at all nine types with pure rates of return. We talked about this, and it's one of my biggest takeaways. It isn't just about the rate of return of every asset class and every decision. Part of it is, hey, you want to own your log cabin in the mountains, you want to have it paid off, you want to feel it's yours. That can be more important than it's only a 4% rate of return versus something else that might be 8%.
And I think we're coming to that, just tapping into the energy and the vibe of a four. Because remember, whoever's listening, we have all nine energies, numbers, pieces in us. The question is how do we rank order them? And for
Right.
me, my top is an eight, but my next one is a four. So I really get this piece of it.
Yeah.
Um,
It does speak to you if you think of some of the things that you probably do. You love the land, you love nature, you're energized by nature for sure, right? I mean,
I wear all black, I'm like
well,
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash, right? You are Johnny Cash, right?
Here's a four.
Yeah,
Um,
but I mean, it's such an important point that you've made here that when we're looking at wealth 360, it isn't just about maximizing rates of return and making the most money or accumulating the most wealth. There are other considerations, and we've lost sight. We used to lose sight of that. Part of it is understanding someone's why. So maybe if we've heard something from Ariella that says, "Hey, you know, maybe we should own some real estate. That's something we should consider, even if it doesn't have the best rate of return, if that provides her, the holistic life that she wants,
So
right?
fours, I would argue, are disproportionate amount of psychologists, therapists, because they're so in touch with the depth of emotion and what she said, and she's extremely wise. I don't think she consciously put this together, but I think she tapped into her, superpower, which is that just that empathy, that feeling. And what she said was, I want to feel my investment. And there's something about that earth and about, it's called in spiritual practice for anybody listening. It's called, was it called earthing or grounding? You just take off your shoes. It's like an obvious thing,
Oh
but
yeah,
you just walk in the grass and you can, she does this with her clients, just getting connected to the grass psychologically, physiologically, spiritually. We're so out of whack with the rhythms of nature. And so, what if our investment could bring us a bit of that? And
yeah, yeah. I might argue and magnify that it might be more than a bit to say this is mine. You feel what you own, you can touch it, or it's more abstract to people like here's a share of stock that you own, it's going up or down any given day, or even more abstractly, here's some cryptocurrency that I kind of don't completely understand, but it may go up. So I think you've really hit on something critically important on, understanding 404 that it could be, or maybe Ariel has done that with, hey, it could be, and when you put the word alternative, usually alternative, at least in our business, talks about things other than stocks and bonds and cash. Talking about other types of assets, which real estate could be a type.
and alternative forms of ROI, return, thinking of return on our investment, like you've been describing it, is so much more, or at least both, and the numbers bottom line, but also these psychological components. What does it mean to own a piece of land? I'm gonna riff here, back to my rabbi days. It's interesting. Abraham from the Bible says, it says in the section when his beloved wife of many, many years, decades, Sarah dies. One of the first things he does is he acquires a piece of property. And it's the first recorded financial acquisition we have. I don't know if recorded history, but certainly in the Bible, which is ancient history. And he buys his section of the cave of Machpelah. And if you go to Israel, you can visit in the land of Hebron, where he purchased this land. And but it was more than just a transaction. It was cathartic. It was therapeutic. And I saw this as a rabbi. When people had a piece of land to inter their loved one, and I don't care if it was, regular burial or if it was cremains, but when they had this piece of property, it was like healing to be able to go there, to visit, to locate their relationship. And of course, their loved one isn't in dirt. Of course, Abraham wasn't just putting Sarah into the ground. And there was something more about taking care of our responsibilities. So I think we're in some real primal territory when we're talking about a real estate investment or being connected in a deeper way to some of to these fourish alternative investments.
Yeah, I think you've hit a really salient point of these other types of investments that also connect with the why, and it's not just financial investments, which is generally my main focus. But if there's other reasons to try to connect that.
As it should be your focus, but that's why we work together, expanding, to 360. And I think people who come to you are just so fortunate to have a financial planner who's really taking a holistic approach to money. Anybody who's a 3, 7, or 8, kind of the top tier earners and investors, don't worry, Michael will still give you the traditional ROI, but
Yeah,
you know,
they don't have to work. They're good with that. But to your
but
point, it's
yeah, a new way of looking at it holistically.
well, and
Um,
helping them too. The 3 7s and 8s, sometimes are so ultra focused on that ROI or accumulation that they miss some of their other why. So that's why when you develop this wealth 360, and 360 being full circle, holistic, it's nice to bring some of these other pieces into it to get the maximum experience.
Yeah, let's kind of wrap up a little bit here with I'm going to share this slide, and for anybody who can't see it, this is from the Wealth 360 program that we're creating. But just some highlights here. The investment strategy, we're calling it again alternative investments, and sort of a moderate risk. Although it's interesting, if you look down here, fours have high risk tolerance. So in some ways, they're good investors because they just aren't attached to their money. So yeah, I would love to hear your response to this, Michael. But my sense is, watching Ariella, when the markets have been up and down over the past couple of years, really doesn't phase her because she's just not that emotionally attached to her money.
Uh, Absolutely. And I don't know, are fours one of the least reactive personalities? I don't, or you tell, I know I'm not quite at the level yet of understanding all
So
of the factors, but
eights, fours, and sixes are the most reactive for different
okay.
reasons. But here's an interesting thing. In my experience, and in doing our work for Wealth 360, what I found is because they're so reactive. I mean, if you think about back to the slide of those artists, so many of them have been reactive, eccentric types, but they spend their time focusing their reactivity in areas they really care about. So their art, they'll be
Right.
highly volatile. But when it comes to something they don't care about, like money, they live in reaction. This
Yeah.
is nothing. They don't care about the markets.
Yeah, so I'd say that's what I find that from that perspective, they're very powerful personalities. But when it comes to money, money doesn't phase them quite as much as it does other people, and as a result, that has its tremendous strengths and some weaknesses that you have to be careful because they will take risks because they're not going to pay attention to it as much as others,
Yeah,
and that can sometimes hurt an artist or someone of that. Um, Ilk, right? They're not going to pay attention to what they're invested in, so they can, they could be in something that's so high risk that it may not make up for the risk reward ratio.
that's right. So, just a couple other kind of points on that. And that's, I think, why a four would be so apt to find a financial planner, because it's just not something they want to care that much about. And they probably want somebody who is a three, like my good friend Michael, who, just isn't, you're more dispassionate, I think, when it comes to things than a four for sure. And I think that's a good counterbalance, right? To have
Yeah,
that person who's got their eye on the ball.
yeah. A four loves having full service help with it because they are disinterested in this area and interested in other things. So in a way, it's a perfect fit for what we do because we can help them take this off their plates, and they usually give us the leeway to use our expertise.
Because you are also our financial planner, so I can speak to Ariella's feeling about it. One of the things I think, she'll say to me oftentimes, well, just what does Mick think? What does Michael think? Um, because I think she really knows that she doesn't trust her emotional reaction when it comes to a big expenditure, like let's say a piece of real estate. And she doesn't fully trust mine. We trust each other, but I'm in highly reactive eight. I'm pretty intense. And so we need that kind of counterbalance. And you've become this sort of, I don't know, this kind of regulation in her mind of to regulate some of the reactivity. And I just think it's important for a four to have that counterbalance.
Well, if you watch Ariella's podcasts and all the great stuff that she puts out, I can kind of see that because she understands the Enneagram and she knows that I'm a three, it probably gives her some comfort because she knows where I'm coming from mentally, right?
Yeah.
So because she's an expert in these areas as well, she probably has a little sense, hey, we're a good combination, probably a four, a three, and an eight to talk about money. And that's really the beauty of what I've learned about this is getting that diversification in personality traits and perspectives, right? We're all coming at it differently, but we all understand each other because we all understand what each other is. So you understand my language, I kind of understand yours, and vice versa, which is the real power of it. I kind of know where you're coming from. You look at me and you'll just say, hey, that's how a three thinks,
Or
right? You're
dresses.
such a three, right? Like that, right?
Yeah. Or dresses. Yeah.
would dress like a three, right? You dress like an eight,
This is a
four,
four. This is a
an eight
four today.
four, a 4-8, and I dress like what I am, a 1-3, 3-1.
Exactly.
I'm a 3-1. So this is a 3-1 dress. I mean, I took a risk. I did the purple tie. It wasn't gray, right?
Man, you're living on the edge.
Exactly, exactly.
That's
But
where you're exactly where I want my financial planner.
right, but it is interesting because it has, at least from a personal perspective, I've been doing this with you for close to a year now.
Yeah.
It's when you introduced this to me, and it really has changed my life from the perspective of communicating with everyone differently. Even at Thanksgiving, I had my son home who he was given the test. I have my mother who was a 2. We have my daughter. We have um, Ellen, my ex-wife, who was a 9. Now that I know what they are, it was really, an easy Thanksgiving, saying, hey, when people want, every one of us we're all different types. So having conversations about things was much easier this year.
Well, that's what it's all about. And really just, creating true, I mean, this is the language of the four, so we'll kind of end here, but
Yeah,
empathy to truly to see through the eyes of another person, right? Not sympathy, not kind of, having compassion and looking down, but really putting yourself into their shoes. And I just love that you're now using the Enneagram to put yourself into some very uncomfortable sandals in the case of fours. For a 3 to be able to put on those Birkenstocks and walk around, in the fourish experience is not organic, but it's something that I know you've really worked hard to bring into your not only personal life around the Thanksgiving table, but also your professional life. I don't think there's too many financial planners really bringing this into their client journey or experience.
well, I'm lucky to have you in my life who has this, large or high 4 capability, who's thinking, why don't you bring this into a financial world, right? I never would have even considered that
Yeah,
ever. And
I
you're like,
agree.
well, isn't this perfect for the financial world as a high 4, creatively? I'm like, really is genius and brilliant, but how do you do it? And then of course you're an 8, so next thing you know, you have an encyclopedia of information. So that's quite a combination, the 8-4. I must say, it really is, that creativity harnessed with like a rocket ship, energy. So
Well,
I've learned,
thank you. It's a work of love at this point. I'm just in loving our exploration.
well, you're going, you know, to a place far, far away, right? A galaxy far, far away.
Um, let's end with just a couple fourish companies that got a fourish vibe to me. I'm going to throw these
Yeah,
out there. You can.
these are so forest. I've never even heard of these companies.
So this is a good one. I'd never heard of this. It's a new platform, online platform. So give our fours something to think about investing in. Masterworks. Had you heard of Masterworks?
I think I've heard of it, but I've never really interacted with it.
It's cool. I know very little, but I know you can invest into like Picasso, into Van Gogh, into the big names in
Mm,
art, and you're like a fractional owner, right? It's like the mutual fund
yeah.
of artwork, and it's just I don't know what the ROI is, but I think to a 4 that might be a very appealing type of an investment, whether it's Masterworks or not. I think that they're touching on a new way to think about art, think about ownership, to think about participating in it. Now, maybe it's too ordinary for a 4. Maybe they want to actually own a Picasso, but good luck with that. So, here's another one. Headspace. You've heard of Headspace.
Yes, I have. I've used Headspace. Yeah.
So Headspace, I think, is kind of a great fourish vibe. For anybody who doesn't know, it's the app that really has kind of brought meditation into a mainstream place, using it in an ongoing daily way, but very fourish in depth. I know you've never shopped at Free People, have you?
I can't say I've even heard of Free People.
So if you think of like a spectrum, of clothing, I think on one end is probably Brooks Brothers, where Michael does his shopping, and then on the other end of that, shopping plaza is Free People. My wife likes Free People, so I put it on there. Here's one that just came to me last minute: Lonely Planet. You know that travel guide?
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can just see somebody walking around like Parisian, museums with their
Yeah.
Lonely Planet. I think it was sold or rebranded, but serious player from a financial perspective in almost every creative traveler's hand who wants to see the world in a special, unique way, which is a very fourish vibe. Look, trust me, it's not easy to really find fourish companies, but I think I did pretty good. What do you think?
No, they are great. Especially, I like the headspace analogy. Say 20 years ago, if you had said meditation to financial people, they look at you like, what are you talking about?
Go back to
Now the
organic
financial
farming.
people are doing meditation before they trade stocks, right? So
Exactly. So
it is amazing how this stuff does come around.
it's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be pioneering these industries, bringing the four-ish vibe into the three-ish financial planning, bringing it all together. That's Wealth 360, and I guess we'll just continue on. By the way, if you're listening, I would love to hear your four-ish companies or four-ish investment strategies. Michael and I are evolving this. It doesn't exist, so we welcome your input. Especially if you're a four, but not only if you're a four, because we want to know, what it's like from your perspective to be involved in finance and money and investing and be a four, and we'll include it into our evolution of this program. Any final words, my friend?
No, again, thank you for introducing, your expertise. You're certainly the grand master of our system here, and we have to get this out to the world.
Well, we are, and this podcast, I'm sure, will go viral. If anybody's listening, share it with your friends, leave us positive reviews, give us some feedback. We are starting to hit our stride here. We're going to get moving into the new year with a lot more Defiant Spirit and Wealth 360. If you want to contact Michael, go to finer.com and learn about all the amazing opportunities he has to work together. And if you want to learn more about me, jump over to defiantspirit.org. I'd love to hear from you. Until the next time, get out there and defy your number, live your spirit, and make some money and have some fun on the way. Thanks, Michael.
Good to see you.